Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of hard rock with a band that I think a lot of people know, but a song that maybe they don't. I actually don't know how popular this is, but this is not what I think of when I hear the band Deep Purple. So we're going to be checking out Fireball today. This is the first track off of their fifth album. According to this, came out in '71. Let's see what's going on with Fireball by Deep Purple. Yeah, dude, the bass is just tearing it up here. The joy in here is just infectious. Just a ton of energy and momentum, constantly driving forward, never slowing down for anything. That was a fun little walk down. Having the bass slide and then the guitar slide right after. Heavy panning on the tambourine. Okay. Yeah. So gonna be a combination of stuff that I feel like I'm talking a lot about with this era of music, but also some unique ideas here that I think are rather interesting. Um, let's start with the bass, right? Because I think a lot of this is going to tie in to a larger idea here. The bass throughout pretty much the entire song, I couldn't really tell in the verse, which makes me think that it's playing what the guitars are playing, and it's just doing it an octave lower. So it's kind of blending in a little bit, which is why it's a bit more hidden for me. I think that's what's happening there, but during the chorus, at least, during the solo sections, pretty much any time other than when everybody's playing the riff, because the song kind of bounces back and forth between the riff, and then the chord progression, at least when you look specifically at what the guitars are doing. They're either playing the verse riff, which is sitting on the pedal note and then doing a little lick at the end, or they're playing chords, which is what they do across the chorus. So the bass, when the guitarists are doing the lick, I'm pretty sure it is doing the lick with them, or the riff. Yeah, we're gonna use that terminology, the riff, because the lick is what I'm calling the little idea at the end of their pedal tone playing. So the bass is playing along with them. However, when the guitars shift to more of a chordal structure, they're mostly laying down the chord progression, the bass shifts to a walking bass line. It's going up and down the chords on quarter notes. And super jazzy idea. 100%. This is what basses do in a lot of jazz. Whether it's an electric bass or they got an upright bass, this is what the bass instrument does in the rhythm section, right? Your keyboard vamps on guitars, your guitarist sometimes plays some lead ideas, sometimes plays some chords. Your drummer lays down the rhythm, and your bassist falls into the groove by laying down these quarter note strikes while walking up and down the chord. This is like jazz bass 101 right here. And we talked about this in, I can't remember the band. Was it Led Zeppelin that this came up in? Black Dog earlier this week? You know what? Maybe. I don't remember anymore. But, seeing these blues roots in this earlier rock and roll stuff, I never heard it before. And I don't know if that's just because, when I listened to this stuff, I was a kid. I wasn't really introduced to jazz yet, and I didn't really have strong understanding of what I was trying to be listening to, what I should have been listening to. I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. So it's really interesting to come back to these bands that I at least have some familiarity with and really hear how influenced they were by blues. And I've always known that rock and roll came from blues. Like, I understand this lineage, but I've never really heard the influence before. And this week has been eye-opening, ear-opening regarding that. Really getting a chance to hear stuff like this. The bassist in this entire song, you could take the exact bass part here and put it into a jazz track and following the same chord progressions, and it would work. I really don't think you'd have to change much to make it fit in with what it's doing. Maybe the verse line would have to be changed a bit, but that's honestly it. So yeah, bass presence, moving bass line. I actually think the bass does more work as far as speed goes, how many notes are played. Or another way to look at that is I think the bass plays more notes than either guitar when you look at the entire song, right? Because they're either playing the same thing, which is that pedal note run into the lick in the verse, or during the chorus, the guitars have whole notes, which means they play one note per bar, and the bassist is doing quarter notes. They play 4 notes per bar. So in the chorus and the solo sections, they're playing 4 times as many notes. And that's sort of the inverse of how modern rock exists. The bassist tends to play a lot less notes than the guitarists. And also just has less prominence. Really, the guitar here lays down a lot of the chordal ideas by walking up and down these chords, but also providing a bit of melodic movement because the guitars do play the chords outright in the chorus, but the bass has this momentum, this movement, going up the chord, coming down the chord, and it has momentum and movement to it that the guitars don't, as they're static. They have more of a stepping stone idea. It takes them 4 bars to have an up and down movement, whereas the bass does it every bar. So yeah, really interesting that. Then we get to the guitar solo, which was filled with oddities. It was a very strange solo, right? Maybe that's just me. Coming at this from a modern rock and roll standpoint, guitar solos usually come in as a point to show off, right? Not always, but usually. There's two types of modern guitar soloing, and that is shredding and just showing off your chops, or storytelling and writing these real flowing, moving melody lines, no different than what you would write for your vocals in a song. But now you've just given that line or something similar to that line to the guitar so that it can have this nice flowing 16 bar melody line that can express what the song is talking about, can push it forward. And here, the opening four bars were just kind of noise, random notes played, lots of space, lots of use of rest. Um, Offbeat strikes, didn't really have much of a flow at all. Just kind of made some sounds. I would say that when the organ, I didn't hear an organ at all until the solo section. I thought it was an interesting voice to bring in. Maybe I just wasn't looking for it. Maybe I missed it completely, but I didn't hear it at all until this solo section. But the organ comes in and actually has strong melodic playing to it. It tells a story with the solo itself, but the guitar prior to it, it just kind of plays some notes on random beats, and it feels odd, right? And compared to a lot of modern soloing, and even compared to the organ solo that comes after it, you might, if you didn't know who they were, right? I mean, Deep Purple's kind of a large band now, and we know that they're they're masters at their craft, right? But if you didn't know any better, you'd be like, oh, that guitarist didn't know what they were doing, right? It's almost like they were given a solo time and they didn't know what to play, so they just kind of muddied their way through their 8 bars so that the next solo could pick up. But what's interesting is you look at it from a bebop angle. You go look at some bebop stuff. Yes, bebop. So bebop was counterculture. We're going to get into a little bit of jazz history here before we move on because I think it's important. Swing and big band were the large jazz styles at the time, and they had become extremely popular. And there were a few people who felt that these styles of jazz were not for the musicians anymore. They were for the patrons or the dancers or the listeners. They lacked the heart and soul of jazz. And they wanted to bring that back. So they made jazz music for jazz musicians, and they called it bebop. And bebop was abrasive, both with meter and note choice. It was designed to challenge people. It was not something that your average person would put on and dance to or enjoy listening to. It's about understanding the complexities of music and listening to the complex things that your fellow musicians could create and understanding how they created it and why it's not abrasive, why it's actually genius. It was a counterculture push to the mainstreamification of jazz. And a lot of, or not a lot of, but some people went into this with speed, right? Some people just really fast. They were the shredders of their days. And some people went into it really playing around with tonality, trying to bring in some microtonality. You have trombones and trumpets have tuning slides as well. There's little ways that you can adjust the pitch on the fly on some of these instruments, and also embouchure comes into play. So they were trying to achieve some microtonality elements. They were bringing in notes outside of the key and really digging into them rather than, like I've said before, touching on them and getting off just to get that little bit of spice that they bring without leaning into that dissonance. No, they were leaning into it hard. They were really creating, interesting combinations of sounds. And honestly, the idea of dissonance and speed and technicality is a lot of what metal does today. It's really cool to see this idea, be brought back into the equation as far as music is concerned. Um, And it's not just today either. Lots of people have been experimenting with this stuff. We have avant-garde classical as well, and there's been music across the eras who have you know dove into all these different styles of composition as well. But the third way that I think some of these soloists really dug into the idea of disjoining or um, reframing the idea of the melody is by introducing moments of space, really digging into rests. And this isn't something that I think is particular to bebop. There's a lot of some of my favorite jazz solos from blues or swing. It's realizing when your solo needs to breathe. It's something that I've talked about even with guitar solos today, that it's constant playing from beginning to end, and there's no moment, um, there's none of that lull, nothing to help these moments stand out. Um, and so, that this isn't something that's brand new to bebop, but how hard they went into it. Sometimes they would have a full bar and a half, even 2 bars of silence, and really just letting the rhythm section kind of be isolated for a moment, which feels weird when you're the soloist. You have the spotlight and you're intentionally not playing. But again, it's that element of disruption, of reframing what the solo is, what it's supposed to be done. And, we can see elements of that in this guitar solo. It is a bit noisy. There's some notes that don't really work together, and there's a lot of space left over. Like I said, compared to the organ section that comes after, which is more of a standard solo I would expect from rock and roll, the guitar solo that comes before it doesn't really seem like it fits. But given that the song already has this jazzy element to it, as soon as I started hearing that, I was like, hey, something's a bit off here. You know, what's going on? Oh, we've got a bit of a bebop idea going on here. And it makes me really wonder if this guitarist, whoever was doing solo here, had listened to bebop growing up. You know, rock and roll, the sound of it, the chords that they utilize, and some of the just the tones that they use in their guitar and the way that they sing, some of it is, or a lot of it is influenced by blues, but that doesn't mean that blues was the only style of jazz that had any sort of influence on what was going on in rock and roll in this era. And it would not surprise me at all to find out that bebop, there were some bebop listeners, and they brought that inspiration into their performances. And I would love to know if the guitarist here has ever spoken about that, if there is any, um, specifically bebop player, Charlie Parker or Mingus or Miles Davis or anybody else that was really big in the bebop genre, in that movement, if they had any influence on this guitarist, if he's ever spoken about that, um, because it is a bit of a free idea of a guitar solo there. It doesn't adhere to what I kind of feel like are the norms. The organ is what I would expect the guitar to have played, vamping a little bit on some ideas, taking a chord and playing around with it rhythmically, and then getting a nice little melody flow to end the solo out before we move into the next section. And instead, it just kind of disrupts the entire momentum of the song, especially since not a section prior to that, I was talking about how the entire song had this forward momentum, constant drive, was not backing down or slowing down for anything. It was just constantly delivering the next section. There's an urgency, an immediacy to the song up until this point, and this guitar solo just kind of disrupts all of that. So it's a really interesting idea. And like I said, I don't know if bebop actually had any influence on the ideas that went in there. It could be completely thematic as far as the story of the song goes. When I dive into the lyrics, I might see what words came before that, and the idea of an abrupt stop or fumbling or something along those lines may have led into that guitar solo being what it is. But on a musical level, without knowing what's going on in the story of the song, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. Is all of these jazz influences showing up in the song from the way that the guitars are done to the way to the bass is done, leading up to this guitar solo that feels very experimental in the jazz field to me. So yeah, that's all totally unexpected, but very cool to hear. The next thing I want to talk about before we dive into the lyrics is the production and some of the production techniques that are going on here. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I feel like it's the same thing I've said all week. Just with this earlier rock and roll stuff and earlier technology, it's going to have a different sound than I'm accustomed to today. Plus, the idea of having these new technologies coming out allowed them to be more experimental, which is something I've talked about a lot with bands like Yes that came out around this time as well. So it's really interesting to me. Well, actually, I'm getting more accustomed to placement, right? 200% panned guitars, and then drums, vocal, bass, completely center. This is not new. This is actually, I'm coming around to having a better ear for this because it seems like it was just what it was with the times. I mentioned yesterday, I think even, that I'm very used to the modern production where when we pan things out to the side, it's not 100%. It might be like 50 or 60 where they're still like center left or center right rather than 90 degrees out and being just like completely separated from the rest of the track. I'm getting more adjusted to this sound, more adjusted to the space, I would say, between the center and the side channels. But what I find completely interesting and which really kind of not disjointed, yeah, it made me feel unsettled. Or, man, what is that word? Anyways, what really caught me off guard in the beginning was the left guitar was so much louder than the right guitar. And it created this interesting lopsidedness where I felt like I was always leaning a bit to the left. Um, and it persisted through the whole track. I mean, it must have been a conscious decision, or maybe it was recorded a bit louder and they didn't have the opportunity to change it back, and they figured that this take was the best they had, even though the volume might have been a little louder, and they just kind of leaned into it as more of a unique production element. Nice little audio characteristic for the track. I don't know, but it is quite a bit louder than what's going on the right. And we checked out Royal Coda yesterday, right? And that's a band that has two guitars. They're both panned left and right, or one's panned left, one's panned right, and they're both doing wildly different things. And at times, one will be a little louder than the other, just because it might be playing more notes simultaneously or something like that. And they kind of trade off based on importance. But here, both guitars are doing the exact same thing. Their import to the song is identical. It would make sense for the balance in the volume to be identical as well, and it's not. It's very strange. Um, but then, so okay, this was really cool though, because when we got to the solo section, the two side guitars cut out so that we could have the solo guitar centered, and the feeling of isolation here mixed with the extremely sparse experimental guitar solo was phenomenal. They did not add anything to these side channels when they pulled the guitars out. So we were hearing this very wide production with a lot of space between it, but a very wide production. And when the solo starts, everything gets scooped up into this tiny, like, sound stage right in front of you. You have the bass walking the line, you have the drums holding the tempo, the time, and then you have this guitar just kind of making a little bit of noise here, not really doing a lot. And it feels empty, it feels sparse. Phenomenal way of creating this feeling. I have no idea what this feeling has to do with anything else in the song, but there was something about it that made me feel small listening to it. And I think that's one of the few things that you can really achieve primarily in production, especially staging, where you're putting your instruments in your sound sphere. That is really important to achieving specific sounds that are going to affect the listener. And this was just phenomenal. Just having everything get scooped up into this tiny little section and feeling kind of tight and claustrophobic. Like we didn't have a lot going on even in this small section. It was sparse in its already small area. And so that was real interesting. I'm going to dive into the lyrics here and see if I can't piece some of this together, and we'll see what's going on. All right, not what I was expecting at all, and I can't really see any correlations here with anything that I talked about thematically going on in the music. I have been introduced to the idea that that guitar solo was actually a bass solo with some additional distortion put on top of it, which is very cool. I don't know in particular if that really changes anything that I had to say about it, but I do like how it was. But I see I wonder. I got to go back and listen to it, knowing that it's a distorted bass now, and see if the timbre speaks to me specifically. Because I thought possibly it was a guitar, really only playing on the lowest string. So I did notice that it didn't quite have the range that I was expecting from a guitar solo. You know, guitar solos usually go up to their two highest strings or three highest strings to, you know, separate themselves in range from their chordal work or any of their foundational work that they did previously through the song. It's an interesting choice to stay in that lower range, but it makes more sense that it was a bass doing it. Um, so yeah, the song is about this uh, alien. uh, yeah, this extraterrestrial woman who crash lands on Earth, and the narrator finds her and falls in love with her, and that's kind of it. That's the whole song. People ask him. I mean, other people are enthralled with her. They ask him where he found her, which is a weird way to go about speaking about somebody, but um, yeah, that's really the whole thing. Is he speaks about how much he loves this person and how she's magical and has said things to him that he's never heard before, which could be taken two ways, either romantically or, you know, knowledge of the vast spaces outside of Earth. You know, if she can travel through space to find another planet, their technology must be better as a race. So, but yeah, that's kind of it. It's a very interesting, simple track, and I'm not sure how the guitar solo kind of or the bass solo kind of ties into that, or even anything else that I spoke about. It seems to be one of those songs where possibly the music's written first, and then the lyrics are just kind of something that he comes up with afterwards. Doesn't really have anything to tie into the music or anything like that. There was that one thing that I completely forgot about. Some sort of sound in the intro that had a real strong panning to it. Oh, that's what I meant to talk about in the production. Dang. So yeah, talking about how other bands around this time utilized new technology and really implemented in ways that kind of sound they're not as impressive anymore, right? Panning is something that we can do with a simple slider or knob in software. So, but you know, it was new then, and we've heard lots of bands around this period really play around with the production in experimental ways, and having this sound of something, you know, careening across the panning in that opening, you know, 5 seconds or whatever, is this idea of, you know, this extraterrestrial landing on the hill. Yeah, he says you stand on your hill. So I'm pretty sure that that's where she crafts landed. And that's where he found her. So yeah, really cool idea of panning. But then we also see this at the end with the tambourine, right? where there's not really much of a reason why the tambourine needs to be panning left to right, but it does, and that's probably again just because they had the technology at the time. It was fresh and new, and it's just part of the way of experimenting with new tech. So yeah, I completely forgot to talk about that in the production. But coming back to the lyrics again, I don't really see any ties here. Maybe you have some insight into this. Maybe it's a bit metaphorical. Maybe there's something I missed here in relationship to something I spoke about previously. I don't know. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you heard here. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions are about Deep Purple's Fireball. When you're done commenting, you can head up to the description box, and in there's a link for Linktree, which takes you to this menu right here. You can find everything related to the channel, such as merch. You can join the Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter, join the Discord community, check out what I've been listening to, just all sorts of stuff. All those links are in there and more above that. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We have one more video that came out 1 minute ago. We're taking a second look at Crowless, which is a band that I was introduced to way too early, I think. I'm hoping to have a much better reaction to it now that I have a stronger understanding of more extreme styles of metal. But that first time I listened to it, about 2 years ago, I guess, about this time, just in my first, my first year of doing these reactions, and it was a rough one for me. I had never heard anything like it in my life. So it's going to be interesting to give them another shot with a slightly shorter track, which I think is going to help, and more education in the genre and in the realm that they're playing. If that doesn't interest you, though, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll be checking out our final hard rock track and looking at a creator request, which is where a band gets in contact with me and asks me to check out their stuff. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.